Welcome back, MTG fans. It's time for the video that you've been waiting for forever. Or so you think. You might have noticed that I called it Beholder 3.0 Beta. That's not because it's a beta edition as in test edition, it's because it's version B of the deck. Version A, Beholder 3.0 Alpha, is kind of not quite done yet. It's pretty close, but it is vastly superior to this deck. Now, in case you didn't know the entire history of the Beholder deck, it was invented by me a long time ago to beat specifically glass cannon decks, any kind of late game decks, and basically anything that relied on combos, because all I had played against at the time was primarily Red Burn, which it also just destroys, or Splinter Twin, or Amulet Bloom, because those are all just waiting for a very particular combo to go off and then they win. So that's what my friend owned, which is hilarious because now he got owned, speaking of owned. And so that's the decks I had looked at. He said, here's some great modern decks, here, build something that'll beat this. So I did. Well, unfortunately, Splinter Twin and Amulet Bloom are both banned. So this deck was designed to beat a deck that doesn't exist anymore. I brought this to the last Modern tournament and I almost came in dead last with it. So this just doesn't beat what people are playing anymore. Pretty much nobody's playing glass cannon combo decks where they either go off or they lose, or even just combo decks in general where they just repetitively try to pound a combo down your throat. Because these will throw a monkey wrench in it. You would beat a combo deck 100 times in a row with this deck. It's just nobody's playing it. So do keep this deck on the back burner, or if you say, hey, no, I'm looking at this deck and this will beat a lot of the stuff I see at my LGS during the Modern tournaments or during Friday Night Magic, well, there you go, run it. Other than that, wait for Beholder Alpha. It is much, much, much better. Now, for those of you who haven't seen the original versions of the deck, which you probably haven't since I put up a note saying, hey, don't watch this video, it's out of date, I'll just run down all the cards and what they do. So Isochron Scepter is in here because, unlike most modern decks that use Isochron, it's not the backbone of the deck. It's not like the whole point, like where I'm going to do some infinite combo. It's just there to make up for if you can't get card draw going. And it's actually a little bit superior to card draw, so that's cool. And then for the anti-magic, we've got Psychic Barrier, Deprive, Mana Leak, and Hindering Light. So I'll start with the obvious ones that were there before. We got Deprive. It only costs 2, it's double blue, who cares? And it'll cancel absolutely any spell at all, which, you know, universal for 2 is like the holy grail of blue anti-magic. That's why Force of Will is so freaking ridiculously, stupidly overpowered and banned, obviously, in Modern. I think it's before the date, too, so it's not truly banned, but whatever. So you do have to return a land to hand, but, you know, you just ditch one of their cards. It's kind of like a Thoughtseize, except it's, like, of their choosing, so it's guaranteed to be a card they need. So it's not the biggest deal. And then whenever you put this on Isochron, you do not have to return a land to hand. Don't let anybody tell you differently. That is the ruling. And then Mana Leak, you know, it'll cancel any spell as long as they don't have 3 mana open. So late game, this is not very useful. Unless you combine it with an owl, I guess, from the other side, but I'll get to that later. But it does cost 2, and early game it'll just shut them down. I mean, even if they have a 1 cost, do they have 4 land on the field? Is it even worth paying the extra 3? Maybe not. I mean, that's why Mana Leak is just fantastic. I love this card. Plus, it's like 50 cents or something. Then we've got Psychic Barrier in because I just absolutely love that card. Eventually, most of the decks are going to try to get a creature out. If not, you can always sideboard this out, but if they're running a no creatures deck, this deck will win, trust me. But just to try to stop it, we got a 2-cost creature canceller, and then they take 1 damage because damage is kind of hard to come by in this deck. Psychic Barrier isn't really like a very common card, it's not very recent, but it's also not very expensive really. But if you really wanted, you could put in Nullify because that will kill auras too, but not many people use auras. You know, so the 1 damage is actually pretty important, but if you really want to cheap out, you could throw in Nullify, and if for some reason you really wanted, you could throw in Essence Scatter. I wouldn't recommend it. And then we finally got the biggest upgrade, Hindering Light for 2 mana. That is all it cost, and by the way, and as you probably noticed, this deck has been changed to be truly 2 colors instead of like coincidentally 2 colors, because it actually was kind of white-blue to begin with, but now it's extremely white-blue, I guess you would say. But the good thing about this is the parameters for the spell. Counter target spell that targets you or a permanent you control. So that's almost any spell. And then once you've canceled it, draw a card. Hello. You put that on Isochron Scepter, the game's over. Because, I mean, you're not going to draw 1 anti-magic for every spell that you cancel with it. It's more like 1 in 3 if you look at the deck. but it's still pretty good. I mean, it's better than not drawing a card, so that's fantastic. Also, if you really need a card, you can actually cast a spell that targets a permanent you control or yourself and then draw a card. Of course, that doesn't really work in this particular deck, but in general, that's how people use this card. So it's just absolutely fantastic. I love, 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 love it. That's it for the spells in the deck, so let's move on to the creatures. Yes, I know creature summoning is considered a spell. Let's start with Judge's Familiar. I still haven't picked up the promo alternate art version of this, which looks freaking amazing because apparently $10 is really expensive, especially when I'm getting totally screwed on OGW sales. But anyway, he can hold any instant or sorcery spell hostage for 1 mana. He doesn't literally change the cost of the spell for cost purposes or whatever, so just keep that in mind. Then we've got Void Mage Prodigy. He is fantastic because he can use that ability without tapping. So Summoning Sickness doesn't mean anything. So you bring him out for 2, pay 2, sack him, there goes the spell. And he has Morph, so whatever. If you really need a colorless creature, I guess. Now, the best part about Void Mage Prodigy is that his ability cannot be stopped unless they're literally playing Squelch or Trickbind. That is it. If you were to cast Deprive or Mana Leak, they could just cancel your Deprive or Mana Leak with their anti-magic or, pull their spell with Remand or pull your spell with Remand or whatever they want to do. But Void Mage, no, he's getting through. So it's just universal, unstoppable anti-magic that can target any spell. I absolutely love it. And let's go with the third anti-magic creature next. This is my favorite edition. I absolutely love this. I think this is actually a request on YouTube in the comment section. It's Meddling Mage. It's a 2/2 for 2. It's mixed color, but who cares? The colors aren't really a big deal in this deck, as you'll see when you get to the lands. And as Meddling Mage comes into play, name any non-land card at all. You don't even have to have proof that it's in their deck. So actually, you could be wrong, which is slight downside a little bit. The named card can't be played. So don't name a card that's in your deck. If they're shredding you with Mana Leak, don't say Mana Leak, because then you can't cast Mana Leak. So the named card can't be played by anyone is the way I would read that Oracle text. So don't burn yourself with that. But other than that, since nobody's ever going to be playing this deck, at least you'll never play a mirror match with this. And if you did, it would suck anyway. Meddling Mage could shut down an entire deck. It's sort of like anti-magic, but it's like the pre-crime division. Like it's gonna anti-magic it before it even happens. So if you've seen Minority Report, you know exactly where I'm going with this. It makes sense. Otherwise, you're probably really confused. And you're probably confused about why I keep using the term anti-magic, because it's a freaking beholder. Do you not play D&D? Anti-magic is like a field, and you can't cast magic in it, and it's called beholder. I mean, people at my LGS use the term anti-magic all the time instead of counter-magic or counter-spells, because then they think you're literally meaning the card counter-spells, so we just call it anti-magic in general. I don't know why that's such a foreign concept to people. I really don't. Especially with the Beholder right there. He's right there. He's big blue. There he is in the middle. Anyway, those are the 3 massive deck-disrupting super creatures in the deck. I absolutely love them, and you might notice that they all hit for exactly their mana total, which is kind of Blue's thing. I mean, sometimes you get like a 1/3 in Blue, because their thing is really low aggro, so I made sure to max out the aggro while also having the best of the best anti-magic creatures. So with 4 spells plus 1 photocopier, and 3 creatures that can all potentially cancel a spell, they're not going to get much off. So let's move on to what keeps the deck from completely self-destructing by top decking. Both of the remaining creatures draw 1 or more cards when they hit the opponent, plus a little extra bonus. So they both cost 3, nothing you can do about that. You're just not going to get this powerful of an ability without paying 3, so it is what it is, but you kind of need it late game anyway, and they don't have an attack power of 3 anyway, so they're not that important. They're actually not even necessary to win, technically. I mean, if you get something on Isochron, you don't even need these guys, but you might as well just overkill them, so hey, why not use both? So whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell with Surakar Spellblade, I'll start with that one first, you may put a charge counter on Surakar Spellblade. So whenever he deals combat damage to a player, you may draw X cards, where X is the number of charge counters on it. So for every time you cast an anti-magic spell, basically, he gets a charge counter, and then you get to draw that many. So once it gets to 3, theoretically, you'll draw an anti-magic every single time. I mean, that's probability-wise, it's somewhat likely to happen. Reality, it's Probably not going to happen, but it's nice to draw 3 cards every time he hits somebody. But then there's the Tandem Lookout. He soul bonds with a creature when he enters the field, or if the bond is broken, or if you summon him alone whenever another one enters the field. So that's fantastic. Because he could repair, he could late pair, you could pair however you want. There's really specific rules about soul bonding, but none of them really even apply to this deck because there's only one soul bonder, so that's just exactly how it works. So as long as he is paired with another creature, each of those creatures get, whenever this creature deals damage to an opponent, draw a card. So they gain that as a triggered static ability, or non-static, just a triggered ability. Who cares about terminology? It's really obvious how this deck works. So let's say he soul bonds with the owl. The owl is flying, he flies right through, boom, free card. That's almost always how it works. Now, if you were to soul bond with Surakar Spellblade, which is pretty rare, he could hit, draw 2 or 3 cards or whatever based on his charge counters, and then draw another card because of his triggered ability. So there you go, multiple card draw. You can also soul bond Tandem Lookout to himself. I know, it seems like that should be illegal, but it's something about state-wise checking and whatever. Who cares about rules? Like I said, it's really obvious how this deck works, so the rules aren't that important. Coming from an RA saying that. So he can soul bond with himself, and then they would actually each gain the ability twice. So when either of them hits, you draw 2 cards. That is absolutely proven fact. Also, with the Isochron Scepter, you may notice that it says, for the actual activated ability, pay 2, tap, you may copy the exiled card. If you do, you may cast the copy without paying its mana cost. So the reason you have to copy the card is to like get it into the right zone, because you can't cast it from exile and whatever. Like I said, rules, terminology, who cares? So let's just put it this way. When you put a spell on Isochron and then cast it or use its ability, you are casting a spell. You do get a charge counter on Surakar. So the judge that I asked this told me that I didn't, and then I looked it up later and you did. So those judges are notorious at my LGS for being just perpetually wrong, especially by sheer coincidence when you're playing against them. I guess we should move on to how this deck operates, because it's just painfully easy. It really is. I've simplified the explanation whenever I share this deck with people. So what you want to do is cancel everything you possibly can until you get to 4 mana, because then you can safely cast a creature. Now, the only exception is Judge's Familiar, but otherwise, the creatures that I actually give a crap about cost 2. So you always want to have 2 mana open, because as you can see, Psychic Barrier, Hindering Light, Deprive, and Mana Leak all cost 2, and you want to be able to stop whatever they're doing in real time until their hand is at half or less cards, because you just disrupted everything. And then if you can get something on Isochron, it's up to you whether you want to try to cast it with only 2 mana or not, because then you'll be completely tapped out, but then you can cancel everything for the rest of the game, theoretically. But that would be the time they would probably sneak out a creature, so it's not the greatest idea. And then do you want to cast it when you've got 4 mana open, and only Isochron and 1 anti-magic instead of 2 anti-magic spells? Because then you could cover them trying to cancel the summoning, which is actually really rare. And then the funny thing is, once Isochron is on the field, and then they instantly try to blow it up with an artifact destruction spell, you can already use Isochron's ability to cancel that spell. It's not the biggest deal in the world. So the earlier the better, kind of, if you feel like being ballsy and you kind of know what's in their deck. Otherwise, everything in here should be cast as late as possible, or just start dumping creatures out when you're completely out of anti-magic. So that does happen, not very often, but it's possible. So you never want to start the game with just 1 counterspell. That's not a good idea. And then for the creatures, well, just don't summon them until you can cover them. Really simple. I mean, same with like Void Mage. You could, summon him solo with 4 mana, because you're pretty sure he's going to make it on the field, and then he can instantly use his ability if they try to cast something else on your turn or on their turn. So as long as you got enough to cover it, you're good, which means that you're probably going to need about 5 mana to cover the Surakar Spellblade or the Tandem Lookout, which is why I tend to occasionally put more than 21 lands in this deck. I think it actually might have more than 21 right now. I'd have to count. But you really got to get to mana really quickly. But then Hindering Light with the card draw, and then the fact that with Isochron you don't really need to draw any more anti-magic in theory, because you can just put Deprive on it. It's a little bit more flexible than it seems on the surface. Once your opponent has had their entire hand worth of cards they've drawn and cards they've started with that aren't lands get canceled by your deck, then you can start pounding them, and right around that time, well, you'll probably not be top decking, and they will, because you'll have a card draw solution, or you'll be able to just draw whatever you want because Isochron has you covered. So one of those two conditions almost always gets met. Why do I not like this deck then? Well, this is what makes it a beta deck. This deck will lose almost every single time if they get a significant or remotely powerful creature out on turn 1 or turn 2 if they went first. So that's a little bit of a weakness. They'd almost have to start with like the world's worst hand or have nothing but 3-cost creatures and up, which there are some decks that do that. So this does crush certain decks. But I don't like the whole if I go first I win, if you go first you win thing, because it's so close on the I have 1 mana on the field versus I have 2 when they have 1 or they have 2. Since crossing your fingers and hoping you go first is not a very good strategy, I'm working on Beholder Alpha, which will acknowledge that a creature might actually get onto the field on their side at some point and then do something about it. But of course, in the meantime, if this current beta deck looks like it will beat what people are playing at your local gaming store, you're probably correct. If it's a lot of slower stuff, a lot of 3-cost stuff, a lot of combo heavy stuff, yeah, go for it. I mean, this will just shred that. In fact, you know how my SEAL Team 6 deck has almost every single creature cost 3 and it doesn't tend to win until turn 4 or 5? Well, this deck beat it, a couple times now that I modified it. I think it beat it, I think it was 9 times out of 10. So, yeah, that deck is like you make one single mistake, slip up once, and you are dead because it's double strike, unblockable super boost. But this deck didn't slip up once because it's amazing. Since the sideboard is so unbelievably flexible with this deck, and it's very dependent on what you see other people playing as far as do you want to cancel creatures, do you want to cancel spells, I'll leave that down in the description. It's more like a list of optionality than it is an actual solid sideboard, because it's just different anti-magic spells, and the land list is down there as well because that's boring as hell and I'm not going through it. So watch out for the new Beholder coming down the pipe soon. Hit that subscribe button if you don't want to miss it, and I will talk to you guys real soon.